Latin Mass, some of it, yeah.
Was St. Stanislaus mostly in Polish?
St. Stanislaus?
Was that a Polish Mass?
Yeah, but the school was bilingual.
I see.
They taught English, they taught their native tongue.
And every time you were at a Mass being an altar boy, did your mother go?
Oh, yeah.
Was your father a devout Catholic?
No.
Did he go to any of your Masses and watch you being an altar boy?
Yeah, he used to go to Christmas, Easter, and birthdays. He'd go to church.
And he didn't do nothing in between?
No.
Did he want you to be an altar boy?
He never mentioned it.
Didn't care less?
Huh?
He didn't care for you either way. Hi, Claire. John's right here. So I bet your mother was very proud when you were an altar boy.
Well, she was more proud with Steve than me.
Why? Why would that be?
I don't know. Stevie, he did more Masses than I did for one.
Okay. Did Steve, your brother, pick up the Latin language?
Yeah, well, he was an older boy.
Okay. Was your brother Louis an altar boy?
No.
Would he have made a good altar boy?
Who?
Would he have made a good altar boy?
No.
No. So basically, it was you and Steve, and your brother Louis wouldn't have made an altar boy.
Yeah.
Okay. She sat quietly for a moment and softly. We had 4 years of German occupation. I was 20 years old, and then I stayed in the Christmas of '39. She shifted about the bench and sat rigid with both of her knees towards Zen. I was in Rowan, a monastery, completing my final year as becoming a nun. After hesitating for a moment, she said, I was not allowed to go home for Christmas as I was concluding my second year and would be attaining my habit.
Yeah, they isolated right away.
What's that?
The church isolated her from her parish right away.
Okay. So was she going to be a cloistered nun?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. She was going to become a cloistered nun. That's
Is there any other kind?
No, I think there is kind. I think just a type of Roman Catholic nuns that they go into the public places, and the cloistered nun just sit in a little tiny 10 by 10 room.
Well, those are the scholastic ones. They do it in theory.
Okay. Bye, Claire.
Bye.
Take care, Claire.
You all too.
Oh boy. I was not allowed to go home for Christmas. Renee became stoical and appeared distant as she recalled her German Luftwaffe started to bomb the Rowan nightly. Good night, Claire.
Hey, Claire. Can't open this.
She would, along with the sisters of the monastery, aid the injured and the homeless, burying the dead.
Yeah?
Renee would, along with the sisters of the monastery, aid the injured and homeless and bury the dead. It was during this period that she learned of her father's death by the Germans in Paris, and a little
Whose death?
I'm speaking of Renee.
Oh.
Renee would, along with her sisters at the monastery, aid the injured and the homeless and bury the dead. It was during this period that she learned of her father's death by the Germans in Paris, and a little later, her timely death of her mother. The bombing of the city increased relentlessly, and to one night the monastery and the convent took a direct hit, killing and injuring many nuns and priests. Many in her class were either injured or killed, and she herself sustained some injuries, but would not elaborate on it. She paused once again and looked at me momentarily. We're here, Claire. Voluntarily. Then continued in a low, subdued voice. Those remaining in the order were sheltered in a large farmhouse several miles outside the city. It was there I began to have misgivings, uncertainty about my faith and vows. I began to become irresolute. She stopped once again and peered out into the lake. I took her hand, and it was icing cold and trembling. She began again. Her final decision came when I learned of my two brothers. Death in the service. I left the order shortly thereafter and returned to Paris. She looked pale and almost ghost-like, and she looked away from me. Her thoughts were from the distant past. I could see that this was very difficult for her to talk further about it, as it awakened old painful memories. She got up from the bench, walked to the edge of the lake, and stood there looking out. I walked over to her and put my arms around her. Then she started to weep softly. I held her, not really knowing what to say, feeling her pain and anguish as she trembled in my arms. I could not stay there any longer. She stopped, burying her head into my shoulder. I have lost my faith, along with my entire family. She peered into my eyes, wiping her tears away. I have nothing now except my paintings, she whimpered. God should have taken away them also. Don't you see, she laminated, looking at me, I am no longer privileged to have the faith, and if I don't have it, I have nothing. She returned to the bench and sat at the edge of it. She had stopped crying and quickly sat there, wiping the tears away from her cheeks with the handkerchief I had given her. I sat down next to her, took her hand and held it, and I looked at her. She appeared more saintly than at other time I had seen her. God did not denounce you, I said greatly. He was only testing your faith and love of him. I continued to hold her hand, and she slowly recovered her composure. We had better go. It's almost dark, and she said softly, still holding my hand slightly. We walked back to the chalet and recognized a familiar large M with a circle at the end of the building. It was the metro station, and we got closer. We would see the distinctive curly green railings and archways bearing the full title, Metropolitan. Renee stated that we should take the number 8 line, which would take us to Boulevard St. Michel's, and from there we can make correspondence connection to Carrefour Debussy, which was within her neighborhood. I purchased a ticket for Renee, and hey, how you doing, bro? I purchased a ticket for Renee and entered the metro platform. She slid her ticket into the automatic ticket bearer as it popped up at the other end of the barrier. She picked it up, and we would need it for our correspondence to St. Michel's. The train was relatively empty, and there was no servicemen on board, which disturbed me slightly. Renee took my arm and moved close to me and smiled as I gazed at her to see if she was all right. The train's open plan cars and extremely quiet. It was a short ride, 20 minutes at most, and I could see the junction station up ahead with its illuminated orange sign making a line terminals. We exited through the bright blue sign marked sortie or exit and boarded the metro bound for Carrefour de Bucci. And in 5 minutes we arrived at the station, and I could begin to pick out the landmarks that were familiar to me. I knew Renee did not live far from here. For the first time, I felt a little apprehension around Renee, as she was extremely quiet. It was still early, 19:30 hours, and I asked Renee if she liked something to eat, as we have not eaten for some time. She stated that she was hungry and would like to have some coffee. We walked a bit and found an indoor cafe, and the night air became cool and damp. As we sat at the cafe, our coffee, Renee asked if I wanted to see her tomorrow. I quickly replied, most certainly, and for the next week or so. She smiled, that infectious smile, and put her hand on top of mine. We are alike, she sighed, even though we appear to be so different. I smiled and told her that her English was 100% improved the last several days. With her first display all day, she explained, "Look who I have for a teacher." I replied, "Now teach me French that quickly." We both laughed, and I was relieved to see she had recovered from the feelings of desolation before I had to leave for the hospital. I then asked her for what was on the agenda for tomorrow. She seemed mystified until I realized she did not understand the word agenda. I explained that meant a program, an idea for where you wanted to go. She smiled understandingly and said the Catacombs. Now it was I who was bewildered. She laughed at my confusion, but would not say anything more about it. I asked her several times to tell me what it meant, but she took great delight in not revealing it to me, realizing that my curiosity had been piqued. As we walked to the familiar street to her house, I asked her if she ever was lonely there by herself. She held her arm tightly and whispered, "Yes, many times, but I've gotten used to it." I felt foolish and awkward if I asked her that question and turned to less personal subjects. We reached the house. I glanced at my watch. It was late, 22:45 hours, and I was to catch the last metro to Antampes. I would have to leave shortly. She realized the lateness of the hour, turned and kissed me and murmured, "Thank you, I'll meet you at the metro station tomorrow," then ran into the house. I rode the metro back to the hospital, and I thought all that happened. I thought of the devastation and turmoil Renee had gone through, the losing of her parents and loss of her brothers, the bombings, the occupation. But most traumatic, I thought, was her leaving the religious order. I was more certain than ever that she would return soon. I prayed for her sake and her peace of mind. I realized that the first time today that I was only 13 years I realized for the first time today that I was only 13 years old when Renee entered the monastery. I could think back to my 13th birthday when we moved into our first home we ever owned, and how proud we all were. It was such a great milestone in our lives, and yet here at the same time, a young girl of 18 entering the greatest challenge of her young life. It was only now, far away from home, that I finally realized the significance of these two events. Our newly acquired home and such a huge event in our lives. I can imagine what Renee's departure for the religious order meant to her and her parents. So at 13, you got your first new home, and do you regret selling that house?
Oh,
You had that same house since 13. What was the address of it?
On 13th Street?
No, at 13 years old, you bought your first house with your mom and dad. Your mom and dad bought their first house. What was that address?
3063,
3063 what?
Orleans.
Do you regret selling it later? Being that was the first house of your parents.
No, I mean, the house was old. The house was brand new, old-fashioned.
So you
And we
have,
were moving out of the area anyway.
so you have no regrets in selling it?
No, I don't think my parents did either.
Okay. All right. So when you were moving into the first house your parents bought, Renee were first going into the monastery. She was going into the
Yeah, yeah.
monastery at the same time.
I was still set on that.
Ann, Jean, and even my own family seemed insignificant and further away than ever. Our experiences and tribulations were pale alongside Renee's painful adversities. She displayed more strength of character and resolute resolve than I could, and she did not. She did it with complete detachment and humility.
Oh,
I did not sleep well that night as I thought about Renee, and what disturbed me most was I had such misgivings about her, such as those German paintings, which I still do not fully understand, and her predisposition not to talk about herself. I felt I should examine my own inclination regarding the same matter. I realized that here was a person I could get a great affinity towards, and one who would fill the great vacuum I felt in my life. Of course, it would never happen. She was destined for a higher calling, and I was for a higher calling, which I was certain she would answer with great dignity and distinction. She had been exalted to a noble and lofty expectancy, and there should be nothing to deter or dissuade her from achieving it. The next morning was uneventful, with the exception that several men were shipping out and returning to their units. The process had started, and it was not long before my time here would come to the end. Although I was not pressed for any decision regarding Renee, I felt again that I was missing another opportunity regarding my future life. I had gained some insight into my ambivalence and decided definitely that Renee would be the only person to set off a decisive, true life course. Of course, I did not know her true feelings regarding any of this, but I surmised instinctively that she had the same, and not even considering her vocation, which was the deciding factor. We were issued several bits of clothing: long-sleeve wool undershirt, an OD walnut sneakers, walnut sweater with a large collar buttoned up front, and several pairs of wool socks, all to be taken with us when we left there. They would be useful here also, as the temperatures slated to drop to the 30s. I decided to put on the undershirt. It was quite cold last night. I wondered how Renee stood with only a sweater on. We were also issued some of our back pay, and I decided to seek out the hospital PX to see what they had available. It was in the basement of an adjoining building, the psychiatric wards, and I was always reluctant to go over there. The PX was mostly staffed with French civilians, and as I wandered about, I realized they did not have much to offer, which was only reasonable considering we were in the middle of a war. I stopped at one of the counters, and a French clerk came to me, smiled, and said, "Bonjour." May I help you? I was glad that she spoke some English and hesitantly asked if she had had anything for a young lady. Mademoiselle, she inquired. I nodded in the affirmative. She showered me with several items, a ring, a bracelet, a watch, but none of them seemed suitable. She then reached over the counter and produced a flat rectangular box. She opened it up and held a pair of nylon stockings. I was surprised that they would have them here, as there were a terrific shortage of them back in the States. Then I realized they were probably here for the nurses' station at the hospital. I said I would take them, not even asking the size. And I was even more surprised when I found out there were 2 pairs of nylons in the box. I paid the clerk, and she was kind enough to wrap them for me. I clumsily said, merci, and she smiled and replied, de rien. I returned to the ward just in time for early chow and making my connection for Paris. As I got off the train, I looked for Renee and spotted her walking toward me. I almost did not recognize her, and she had on a pair of dark slacks what appeared to be hiking boots. She also had on a heavy ski jacket with a wool knit cap tucked over her ears. She smiled and said cheerfully, bonjour, are you ready for some hiking? I'll be only a short metro ride. She just suggested as she took my arm and headed for an automatic ticket barrier. She had already bought the ticket and she slid it into the barrier. I could not help noticing that she looked stunning in slacks. Her hips were firm and her small derriere swayed slightly from side to side as she walked. Then I noticed a small package I was carrying but did not mention it. In a matter of minutes, we had reached our destination. A small hand-painted sign read Catacombs, all in black block letters. We descended a flight of stone steps with sand-colored water trickling in the gentle stream down their entire length. As we descended, the air became thicker and pungent, with the odor of dampness and something I could not distinguish but had before. I felt as though I was going underground, and the eerie quietness was broken only by the sound of water running down the limestone walls. Renee pulled a flashlight from her jacket and started to throw its light beam around. There were a series of tunnels radiate up from the center point, and she took my hand and guided me into one of the tunnels to our left. She seemed familiar with this area, and once again my curiosity was aroused. We walked for almost a half a mile through the puddles of the water, and all the while the smell was almost nauseous and sickening. We finally came to a cutout into the limestone, being illuminated by several torches jammed in the limestone wall. There were several crude wooden tables and benches scattered about. Almost one of the dampened walls was what appeared to be an old U.S. Army 10-trunk portable field switchboard. Renee noted my interest in it and remarked occasionally they were seldom used since the Germans had listening posts throughout Paris. To one corner of the cutout were several makeshift bunk beds with a straw mattress similar to the ones we found at Haverford West. The floor was of the same material as the walls and ceiling. Outside, some of the tin cups and the plates and a wooden table that would be the extent of the furnishings. I turned to Renee and said in complete bewilderment, "What is this place?" She turned to me quietly in a hushed tone, murmured, "This is where I spent the German occupation after I left the monastery. This is part of the headquarters for the French underground. This is part of the headquarters for the French underground." I looked at her in amazement, and I could not believe what I was seeing, and even more what Renee was relating to me. I thought perhaps the odor of the place was getting to me. I looked about. Renee? Huh? How much more time?
4.
Keep reading. Ray led me out to the passageways and tunnels. As she pierced the darkness with her flashlight, I could see crushed bones and skulls piled the walls and twisting passages.
Was it scary there, John?
What?
In the catacombs? Was it scary in the catacombs?
That was their burial homes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's where they buried the dead.
Several of the rooms were the same. As she pierced the darkness with her flashlight, I could see crushed bones and skulls piled the walls of the twisting passages. This was obnoxious, offensive smell I recognized but could not place when we first entered the subterranean dungeon. Some of the other rooms were the same at first we had seen. Some of the more bunks and tables appeared to be an aid station, as it had a long wooden table in the center with several box-like cabinets hanging from limestone walls. All in all, there must have been a dozen separate rooms, all pretty much the same. Renee seemed familiar with all of them as she looked at each of them with certain discernment and repugnance. "Hi, Claire."
Hi, Claire.
"Come on in. We got a chair reserved for you, Claire.
Huh?
We got it reserved for you." Okay.
You go along with the flying legends, huh?
Yeah.
We're still reading, and yeah, that's good. We're still reading.
Have a candy there. Take the last one.
Have
I
a
think they're
candy.
gone.
Yeah.
I think they're all gone.
Is there any in the room?
All right
Oh,
here.
there's one right there. Yeah.
Okay, some of the rooms were the same as the first we had seen. Some had more bunks and tables, and one appeared to be an aid station, as in a large wooden table in the center with several box-like cabinets from the limestone walls.
Wrap it up.
Huh?
We got 2 minutes.
I'll just keep.
Just talk to him a little bit more.
What are you saying? What are you saying?
So tell us about the catacombs in your own words. Renee took you to the
That
catacombs.
was burial ground for the French.
How was it? You went down a long ways to the
No,
catacombs.
you go down maybe. They dug tunnels. They had dug that street up for that. That was years ago. There were probably 5 steps going down to the rear area, into the back area.
But Renee looked familiar with it, right?
Huh?
Renee looked
Well,
familiar.
she had probably her parents were buried there and everything.
And was there many bones?
Then you what?
You said was there many bones in all the different areas?
No, the bones weren't there. They cleaned everything up. They buried it or burned it or what? They didn't have the skeletons laid around. No,
Okay.
it's just perfectly clean.
Was that one of the spots where the French underground would meet?
They had an office down there. That was one of the resistance offices.
So basically no one knew about that place.
Oh, imagine the people that were in it, they knew about it. And I imagine the French, the civilians knew about it too.
So how long did you stay in the catacombs for?
In the catacombs?
Yeah, how long did you go down there? How long did you stay when Renee took you down there?
Actually, there's nothing, you couldn't eat it down there. There's no facilities down there. You just wrote some records and that was it.
So basically you went down there, then you left.
Yeah, I didn't stay there long.
Was it like, the entrance, was it like in a wooded area? What was
No, it was in the middle of the street, middle of the town.
Okay. I understand.